represent, or with the patients or individuals you work with within the sober home. That you'll have an open mind, that you'll listen today to all sides and come out enlightened and educated about the issue of sober homes. As fair housing advocates, we take this issue very seriously, and we want you to make sure that you understand all sides of this issue. So without further ado, I want to introduce Reverend Matthew Jean Baptiste. He's a senior pastor of United Haitian Baptist Church on Parker Avenue, West Palm Beach. Pastor Jean Baptiste is well respected in his community and has been instrumental in creating relationships with government leaders and the Haitian community. Reverend Jean Baptiste delivered the benediction prayer during the January 6, 2015 prayer breakfast in honor of the swearing-in of Governor Rick Scott. Reverend Baptiste.
Good morning. Good morning. Let us pray. Have mercy on us, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to our abundant grace, blow out our transgressions. Wash us thoroughly from our iniquities and cleanse us from our sin. For we know our transgressions, and our sin is ever before us. For this reason, we come to you for forgiveness. We come also with praise. We want to adore you and worship you for who you are and for what you do on the earth below and in the heaven above. Today, we want to thank you for the wisdom given to the Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County to set aside a mode for fair housing. This morning, as we are prepared to open the event of Fair Housing Project, we are seeking your guidance, your wisdom, and your direction. We pray for the men and women who give their strength and their time to plan the event. We ask a special blessing for each. We pray for each and every organization represented here this morning. Illumine their heart and mind for more good deeds. We pray for all the speakers. Give to them the tongue of those who are taught, that they may know how to sustain with a word the person who is weary. We pray for each and every one in the audience right now. We pray for those who are on their way. May the knowledge, the wisdom, and the information displayed during the event be beneficial for all the peoples of West Palm Beach and the adjacent communities. Continue to use the Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County for the well-being of all the peoples. To you, Father, be the glory, the honor, the praise, and the majesty from everlasting to everlasting. This prayer we pray in the mighty name of Jesus our Lord, Savior and Redeemer. Amen. Amen.
So as Angela Smith gets ready to come up and introduce our facilitator and panelists today, I just want everyone to give her a round of applause. She has done an excellent job planning today's event and recruiting a star expert panelist for today. So thank you so much for planning an excellent event.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope your tummies are full. Yes, good. I'm glad you enjoyed the breakfast. I want to introduce Christine Stapleton. Many of you have seen her name before. She's been a staff writer for the Palm Beach Post since 1986. She distinguished herself as the paper's court reporter for 12 years, covering such notable cases such as the William Kennedy Smith rape trial. She was among the lead reporters in the paper's coverage of that November 2000 election ballot recount. Her awards include 2 Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards and the 2008 and 2010 Media Award from Mental Health America. Her groundbreaking weekly column, Kicking Depression, and award-winning blog, Depression on My Mind, evolved from her own battle with alcoholism and depression and cover a wide range of topics frequently ignored by mainstream media. Most recently, she has led the paper's coverage of sober home litigation and legislative initiatives. Please welcome to the podium Christine Stapleton.
Hi.
Hello.
My name's Christine, and I'm an alcoholic and a journalist. Normally I wing it when I'm at things like this, but this is such an important topic, and we have so much ground to cover that I'm going to read some thoughts that I put together last night. First of all, I want to thank everyone who's hosted this event and worked on getting it together. In Palm Beach County, I believe we have more treatment centers, recovery residences, sober homes probably than anywhere else in the United States. And so this is a very long overdue conversation. And I appreciate the thoroughness and the approach that this event is going to take in inviting all different interests in the controversial topic. As a recovered alcoholic, I'm personally interested in this issue. Although I did not go to rehab or live in a recovery residence or a sober home, I had many friends who did. And as a homeowner with a sober home 3 doors down, I have a very personal interest and financial interest in this topic. Last week we saw the passage of the sober home bill. It's an ingenious bill that creates a voluntary certification process aimed at protecting recovered alcoholics and addicts. The evolution of the legislation is fascinating. Efforts prior to 2014 focused on protecting neighborhoods and property values from recovering addicts and alcoholics. It was a NIMBY approach that butted up against the ADA and the Fair Housing Act. In 2014, we saw a shift in the intent of the legislation, and now the purpose was to protect addicts and alcoholics from unscrupulous and predatory landlords and operators of these homes. Let me just read to you the intent of this year's legislation that passed. This is new, like I said, 2014 and 15. The legislature finds that a person suffering from addiction has a higher success rate of achieving long-lasting sobriety when given the opportunity to build a stronger foundation by living in a recovery residence after completing treatment. The legislature further finds that this state and its subdivisions have a legitimate state interest in protecting these persons who represent a vulnerable consumer population in need of adequate housing. It is the intent of the legislature to protect persons who reside in recovery residences. To me, this shift kind of represents what we saw when the federal government implemented housing regulations for migrant farm workers. And although those are regulations which set specific limits on square footage, the number of bathrooms, all kinds of living conditions, our legislation we're going to see here in Florida is voluntary certification. So it is different, but the aim is to protect safe, clean housing for a vulnerable population. And this is a big step forward for Florida. Recovery residences are a vital part of the recovery process, and they have a long history dating back to the days of the Oxford houses. They have tremendous therapeutic value and must be a part of our communities and neighborhoods to help addicts and alcoholics transition back into society. Recovery residents are also vital in breaking the stigma surrounding these illnesses and showing communities that recovery from alcoholism and addiction is possible and that we can become valuable members of society. There are still efforts underway to pursue the NIMBY, what I call the NIMBY effort regarding this issue. And on Monday, we saw 5 members of Congress, including Congresswoman Lois Frankel and Congressman Ted Deutsch, sign a letter to the Attorney General of the United States and the Secretary of Housing with specific NIMBY-type questions asking for guidance from the federal government on how to address some of these issues. So we're going to be seeing more on this issue. In addition to the legislation that our legislature has passed, we're going to be seeing some guidance coming from the federal government on these issues. So this is an extraordinarily timely event we have going on here today, and really pleased to see so many people interested in this. And with that, we'll get started. Our first speaker today is Dawn Pardo. Dawn represents Singer Island, District 4, on the Riviera Beach City Council, to which she was first elected in 2008. She has run unopposed each election since, and currently serves as council chair. In her 7 years on the dais, Council Chair Pardo has focused her efforts on accountability inside City Hall, economic development, coastal erosion solutions, and securing grant funding and forging collaborative relationships in Washington, Tallahassee, and locally. In that light, she serves as the first vice president of the Palm Beach County League of Cities, and she will be appointed president next month. And among other positions, represents Northern Palm Beach County Lagoon Initiative Steering Committee, the Florida League of Cities Urban Administration's Policy Committee, and for the National League of Cities, the Environmental Resources Committee. With that, I give you Dawn Pardo.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And thank you for attending this panel discussion. This is a very important issue to all of the cities, not just in Palm Beach County, but throughout the state of Florida. I sit on the Palm Beach County League of Cities, but also on the Florida League of Cities. And for the past several years, Palm Beach County has tried to push the state to take a look at sober homes. But we could not make it a priority on the Florida League of Cities because this issue only affected South Florida. But last year, and especially this year, the other members of that committee started seeing problems in their communities with sober homes. We had people from Jacksonville, elected officials from Jacksonville, who said this legislation needs to be a priority for the state. We had representatives from Fort Myers, representatives from all around the state. It was no longer a South Florida issue. With that, the Florida League of Cities has been very supportive of the legislation that Representative Hager and Florida Senate Senator Jeff Clements have pushed and recently got passed. And we are all hoping that the governor passes the legislation. We believe, all the cities believe, it is a step in the right direction. Sober homes or halfway houses for individuals with drug and alcohol problems have been around for decades and provide needed transitional housing opportunities for people who are progressing through treatment for substance abuse problems. However, several cities throughout the state have been experiencing increased problems with sober homes. These homes are marketed as places for recovering addicts to come to sober up and be slowly phased back into society while getting treatment for their addiction. Lately, cities have seen a proliferation of self-proclaimed sober homes that are run by unscrupulous landlords who are exploiting patients in order to make a profit. The Tampa Bay Times recently wrote a series of articles describing some of the problems these unregulated facilities are causing for both patients and non-patients in cities across the state. The investigation into sober homes by Tampa Bay Times senior correspondent Susan Taylor Martin uncovered a multitude of problems. Without licensing requirements, state regulations or oversight setting minimum operating standards, many sober homes operate in the shadow and often fly-by-night type facilities. The Times article reported in some homes, residents are housed in 2 or 3 in a room. These are lucrative businesses if each person pays $500 a month, meaning a 3-bedroom house with 2 residents per bedroom can bring in $3,000 a month, but the residents don't get what they pay for. With no regulation from government agencies, setting up a sober home is as easy as renting a house to a few residents who pledge to live in sobriety and attend support groups. The operators of these problematic sober homes often advertise on the internet as offering treatment on-site or providing transportation to off-site treatment facilities. Once residents arrive, they find that no treatment is offered and there are very few oversight by the owners of the sober homes. Instead, residents are free to do whatever they choose, which for many means to hit the streets to find drugs or alcohol. In one Delray Beach home was attached to a bar. They don't need to go very far to look to find what they're looking for. Law enforcement officials have seen increase in crime and homelessness in neighborhoods where these sober homes have been located. Residents in these neighborhoods have reported an increase in burglaries, panhandling, and even in some instances where the sober home operations are openly using or selling drugs out of sober homes. I'm sure you all read about that recently in the Palm Beach Post. As a result of the lack of uniform state standards or regulations for sober homes, there are some houses that are nothing more than a group of individuals living together, abiding by self-imposed rules of sobriety, while other homes are operating just shy of administering treatment on-site and flying under the radar of the Department of Children and Families because they are not formally affiliated with a licensed service provider. Therefore, the 38 cities of Palm Beach County support the efforts to clearly define sober homes in a statute and allow for the regulation of these facilities. Sober homes will continue to be a problem for cities and law enforcement in Florida until the legislature decides to act and place minimum operating standards for places into statute. I want to just give you a couple of examples of what's going on here. We'll just talk about Palm Beach County. Before the real estate market fell apart in 2007, 2008, if you came to Palm Beach County looking to buy a home, you thought you were buying a home in a traditional residential neighborhood. And traditional residential means a place where you can raise your family, where you have a backyard, where you know your neighbors. Where, right, traditional neighborhood, you don't think there's going to be any commercial operations in your neighborhood. Well, that changed with the downturn of the market. We had investors come in, started buying up the foreclosed homes and looking for ways to make a profit on these homes. So what they started doing 2 things. They started turning these homes into vacation rentals. And they got the state to say, cities, you can no longer regulate vacation rentals. You cannot ban vacation rentals in your community. What you can do is you can apply codes to them, but you have to allow vacation rentals. You also, the federal government told us you have to allow sober homes in your community. The cities of Palm Beach County are in favor of sober homes. We're in favor of drug treatment centers that, with FARM earlier, with agencies that, or with sober homes that are willing to be regulated by agencies. We are in favor of that. But when you have a sober home in a residential neighborhood, when you see these young, and they're young, 19, 20, 21 years old, these young men and women coming from the Northeast down here, thinking they're getting treatment, they're not getting treatment, they're hanging out in the backyard, and then the neighbors on both sides of that sober home, when they're in their backyard, they can hear the discussions going on between these young men and women. And you would think HIPAA would, if HIPAA, HIPAA regulations got involved, that's a conflict right there. Cities would love to be able to say, okay, you can bring your sober home or drug treatment center into a residential neighborhood so these young men and women can transition, but do we have to have entire streets filled with drug treatment centers? We have a street on Singer Island, on Lake Drive. The entire street is drug rehabs. You see that in other communities here in Palm Beach County. When you have these rehabs, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them on one street, and then you have, 2 traditional residential homes there, it's very difficult to feel comfortable to let your children go out and play and ride their bicycles when you don't know who the people are in the house across the street. The only thing you know about these people are some of them are getting into a van 3 times a day, and in my community, going to North Palm Beach, getting an hour and a half of treatment, and then coming back, doing whatever they do for the next half hour, 2 hours. It's constant back and forth. And then we have the commercial trucks, the laundry trucks, the food trucks, coming back and forth in and out of the house in these traditional residential neighborhoods. It's very frustrating for all of the cities. What we would like is to have the state, or I guess it would be the feds, to allow the cities to say, you can only allow 2 of these treatment centers on one street, or they have to be so many yards away from a traditional residential home. So, it's a frustrating issue for the cities because our hands are tied. And what we're seeing now is when people come in to buy a home, one of the first questions they're asking the real estate agents, are there any vacation rentals around me? And are there any sober homes around me? So what really needs to be done, and I hope with the new legislation that is being passed up in Tallahassee, and with the good treatment centers that do the right thing by their children, by their patients, I hope the cities and these agencies can come together and try to work on the problem. And like I said earlier, the cities are not against these sober homes. They're needed. They're needed. But we need to come to some kind of an agreement. You just can't come into residential neighborhoods and plop them down wherever you want and then say you can't do anything because of ADA. It's just not right. And really, it's beginning to kill our residential, our traditional residential neighborhoods. So with that, thank you. Give you a little food.
Next, I'd like to introduce John Lane. John is the president of the Florida Association of Recovery Residences, known as FAR. Over the last 2 years, he has helped to develop the organizational infrastructure and continues to support initiatives to enhance the rights of residents who seek to enjoy alcohol and drug-free housing that is safe, clean, and peer-supported. John is also the managing partner of Cashbox Solutions, a payment system developer that that designs financial and management cloud-hosted software solutions for the recovery industry. John is also very knowledgeable about the legislation that just passed, and I know I'm very much looking forward to his thoughts on what lies ahead in terms of this legislation. John?
Thank you, Christine. And thank you, Legal Aid Society, for putting this on. This is fantastic. Angie, thanks for inviting FAR to be a panelist. And I love, as Christine mentioned in her opening comments, the fact that we have multiple perspectives from which we can draw today. I'm going to ask you to indulge me a moment. We spent quite a lot of time over the last 6 months working with a documentary filmmaker named Michael DeLeon from New Jersey. He created a documentary called Kids Are Dying, and it's now just finishing up a national exposure called An American Epidemic that addresses the heroin epidemic throughout the United States. I believe that A&E and Bravo and Discovery Channel and a couple of others are bidding on that movie right now for public airing. Michael was kind enough, we met at a Recovery Film Festival about a year ago, and he was kind enough to donate his time and his expertise to prepare a 13-minute film that addresses community partnerships. As has been discussed briefly here today, I became an advocate for the individuals that are consumers of recovery residence services. About 3.5 years ago, when I was introduced to the National Alliance for Recovery Residents, which had formed about a year earlier than that. And it was formed by a number of well-established, decades-old regional organizations. One in the neighboring state, Georgia, that's almost 30 years old now. And one out in California, 2 out in California, 1 in Michigan, and 1 in Connecticut. But there was no such organization here in Florida. And it was a shock for me to find that there were organizations that provided education, advocacy, and oversight of the recovery residences in their region. That oversight was married to standards, so it's not like a licensing criteria. It's about raising the bar, improving the quality of services that are presented by the individual programs that apply for certification, not unlike a JCO accreditation for clinical service providers. And so as I began to get educated and as I began to look at the landscape of Florida, I realized that somebody had to get involved and try and bring this standard-based certification process to Florida. There were a handful of sober home operators, George Jan, who's sitting here today, Allison Chambers, Nancy Steiner, who was the founder of FAR at the sanctuary in Delray Beach. But there were, I think, 8 of us, or 9 of us, myself, and 8 sober home operators that formed FAR and began to apply these national standards and the certification process. We had no idea what we were doing, and we certainly had no idea what we were about to get into. Simultaneously, 6 months into our operations, a bill was introduced by Senator Clemens that would have called for mandatory registration of all sober homes, and simultaneous with that, we were attending meetings not unlike this in public forums where mayors were standing up and saying that they didn't know where the sober homes in their city or their community were located, but they did know that they were responsible for an increase in crime and a decrease in property values, and as soon as they found out where they were located, they were going to use zoning ordinances to get rid of them. And so we knew we had to take some action, or this service that is provided by sober homes would be eliminated from the state of Florida in a hurry. And so that launched the whole advocacy issue. And again, no idea what we were doing. We got lucky in a couple of instances. And then we got a great deal of support from FAD, Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association in Tallahassee, and they did know what they were doing. And they stepped in and recognized that this was something that its time had come, this business of approaching this from a standard-based perspective. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me. I want you to, this is the first time this film has publicly been aired. The credits are not even included in it yet. That'll come at the end of this week. And then we'll talk a little bit about what it presents after it airs.
It's just like a wrecking ball that comes in, and it's a roller coaster, and there's no end to this. It's in every family, every school district, middle class, low class, we're all affected.
We all should be concerned about it because it's our loved ones, our parents, our brothers and sisters, and our children. This is everybody in America who is affected by this.
We come from a very good family, strong family. We don't have drinkers. We don't have addiction in the family. I mean, smart guy, athletic, just so much potential. Just, you could tell he was going to do something awesome. You know, Abby was, in general, a good kid. She was a good kid, and she didn't go without, that's for sure.
Justin was very charismatic, loving, caring, very affectionate, very smart. A 3.0 student at Drexel, Syracuse University, and Temple.
He was, captain of the football team. Everybody loved him, big man on campus, lots and lots of friends.
He was just a charmer. You would never think that he would do that.
Yes, opiates. There was actually a combination of OxyContin, Vicodin, and Xanax in his system when he died. He was 19 years old.
I mean, no one is immune to addiction. And they're kids. They're going to experiment. They do not understand what line they just crossed. He just had no control. No control. He obviously that was not the person he wanted to be. But he couldn't fight it. And you never know. You never know when the phone call is going to come. That's going to be the last call. You cannot use a siloed approach to addressing this problem. You cannot ask teachers to address this problem for you. You cannot ask law enforcement to address this problem. You can't ask parents to just be better parents, and we're gonna solve this problem. It doesn't work that way.
Like, what are we going to be doing on a community level? And in order to do that on a community level, that requires us as individuals to be involved. That means that we have a responsibility for ourselves and for the people that we love and our communities as a whole and society as a whole to do something different and to focus on the solution.
We reviewed all the scientific studies that said, do recovery centers, do recovery clubs, do recovery cafes, do recovery employment sites, do recovery homes make a difference in terms of long-term recovery outcomes? Do they reduce relapse? Do they increase long-term recovery rates? Do they enhance the quality of life of individuals and families in long-term recovery? We have the beginnings of those studies that we've summarized in the monograph. The evidence to date is an overwhelming yes. And the place in particular, because we've had the most studies done on those, is in the recovery home.
I came very broken and very willing to do what I needed to do. I spent a lot of my adult life working, like a responsible member of society, and throughout the course of my addiction, I lost all of that. I lost my condo, I lost everything. I had multiple jobs, and I had gotten to the point before I came down here that I didn't feel that there was really much else to live for, that I was destined to be an addict, and live an addict, and die an addict. And coming to Avenue 12, the first thing that they give you there is hope. I got a lot of hope out of being in Avenue 12. They put you in a position, the management and the other senior members there. I was always treated with love and respect. Always, always, always. Even when I didn't do my chore, I was treated with love and respect. And through those women, I got to learn what it was to be a woman in recovery, what it was to be a grown-up woman in recovery. And that's what Avenue 12 taught me. I stayed the 6 months that I was going to stay. I graduated a couple of years ago. They didn't have lovely apartments here when I graduated. I wish they did, because I definitely would have gone in. I think it's an amazing opportunity for the ladies to transition out of the houses and sort of like almost like a three-quarters house before you're ready to go out on your own.
Avenue 12 has made a positive difference in our community in the just a little over 5 years that we've been in operation. With women returning to the workforce, continuing their education, returning to successful careers. We have reunited hundreds of mothers with their children. During 2013, Avenue 12 provided 9,791 nights of safe and sober living, provided 29,373 healthy home-cooked meals. We ensured that 100% of our residents gained employment and gave back 2,922 community volunteer hours. This is just the beginning.
And your official membership plaque.
Oh my gosh!
And of course, we're thrilled to have Avenue 12 as a whole, as a member in the Army Chamber. And we're so excited for finally doing the ribbon cutting.
That's what this should be about, is what's in their best interest. It's not the drug test, it's not 20 people to a home, it's an opportunity. If we can give these kids a fair shot on getting sober and provide the structure and accountability that they need to enable them that opportunity, that's what it should be about. We want to know what their intentions are as well, because when they get to us, they're going to understand that it's not about the best, it's about them contributing, it's about them volunteering, it's about them practicing good faith policies, it's about them being a part of the solution. If they don't want to do that, I get it, but they can't live here and do that.
And people are using and still staying in these recovery residences, or they'll be asked to leave for the day, and they'll put them in the street or in a hotel room for the night, and then they come back the next day, as long as they can piss clean, and then they can come back in. Now, if people see this going on, of course they're going to have a bad taste in their mouth.
And I see these things and I hear about these things that are all too common, and they need to stop. Because people that are trying to recover from alcoholism and drug addiction are becoming victims in their recovery in all sorts of ways. And I think what we need to do is promote providers who care about the individual first. And I've met a lot of people down here that do care about that. It's important to me that everybody knows that there are places in Florida, surrounding the bad stigma that are safe to come to and reputable, and the people actually do care.
Bad operators come in two flavors, slumlord and opportunists. They're both predators. They take advantage of the vulnerable population for personal gain. Law enforcement has arrived fact, they've been here for about a year. They're focused on this urinalysis and patient brokering issue that we had in South Florida, and that's their responsibility to clean up that mess, and they're doing a good job. They are committed to staying for however long it takes to clean up the industry, and we're very grateful that they're here. So what that does for us is it allows us to focus our efforts and our energies and our resources on helping the good guys to improve the quality of support and care that they provide to individuals who are actually seeking freedom from addiction. And there are plenty of those here in South Florida as well.
So when we look at this idea of, are we attacking addiction recovery? Are we attacking recovery on a macro level? I think we could do a better job. And my personal passion has to do with this idea of improving access to education. So we look at sense of meaning and purpose in life. And if we look at education level, they're both large insulating factors against relapse. And if we can get this sense of meaning and purpose in early recovery, we might see better treatment outcomes. And I just want more people to understand that collegiate recovery is a real thing. It's happening. Without recovery residences, we wouldn't have the students staying abstinent until they could enroll in these universities. So recovery residences are a key component of this full continuum of care, and they're also a key component in allowing students to pursue an education.
Now, I can tell you from personal experience, I can identify the students in recovery in my classes every time. Their attitude, their willingness, they show up, they dress up, they do the homework, they start study groups with other students in recovery, and they may not be the smartest students, although some of them are very brilliant, but they are the most successful students that I have as a result of being in recovery. My residents are out applying for jobs. There's a whole network of people in recovery. They don't have to worry about the fact that they're living in a recovery residence. They are almost sought out by employers because they know that they're responsible, they're presentable, and they're trying to make some positive changes in their life. And employment, as well as education, is a key point with regards to that.
Mayor here, or previous mayor, last year's mayor, is now new commissioner for the next 4 years, and who's been very supportive of us over the years. And just because she likes me, I guess, I don't know.
Because you're an important part of the community. I'm Commissioner Lisa Pearman, Commissioner for the City of Margate, and the fellowship is an important part of our community. We love them. We love all the help they give us. And I met Rick when they were cleaning up after one of our events before we had a volunteer program. And they were always there, and I introduced myself to them, and then we got a volunteer program. So now we try to use them all the chance we get.
FAR wants to partner with Chambers of Commerce, Rotary Clubs, other civic organizations on any labor-intensive project they might have that they need volunteers for. We have a willing, able-bodied army of volunteers. So together, we have an opportunity to change the climate and to add real value to the community. And that is what giving is all about, isn't it? So the goal here is to partner up, to act in concert with each other instead of pointing fingers at each other and talking about we don't want those sober homes in our single-family neighborhoods. These good guys, you actually do want in your neighborhoods. You know, they're a resource, they're a valuable resource in your community. And it's time that these guys come out of the shadows and actually demonstrate both their willingness and their ability to make a positive impact on the community. They want to do that. So let's figure out how we can do that together.
Well, it was fun to watch you all actually paying attention to that movie. Did it hold your attention? Was it too long? Was it just enough? I want some comments.
Calling here before our next speaker to just speak a little bit more about HB 21, the bill and some of the housing aspects of that. First of all, the reason that this bill, rehabs, the 30-day rehab centers, they will not be allowed to refer their clients to recovery residences, sober homes that are not certified, okay? So that means if I'm a mom up in New York and I'm sending my 20-year-old down here to rehab, and then my 20-year-old wants to go into a recovery residence or a sober house, I'm going to be able to say, I want to make sure that my kid is going to a certified recovery house rather than just some recovery house. So that could be a reason that this thing really works. And the other thing I want to just run through a few housing things that are going to be required to get certification from FAR. Now, we don't know if FAR is going to be the certifying agency, but here are some of the housing requirements to get certification from FAR. These are the things, these are the NIMBY things, okay? And these are some of the things that the ADA, that is going to enable this to kind of, I don't want to say get around the ADA, but let me just read a few of these real quick. Recovery residents must have 1 sink, toilet, shower per 4 residents and adhere to local and state requirements. Recovery residents have laundry services that are accessible to all residents. Recovery residents maintain the interior and exterior of the property in a functional, safe, and clean manner that is compatible with the neighborhood. Recovery residents have meeting spaces that accommodate all residences. Recovery residents have appliances that are in working order and furniture that is in good condition. And recovery residences address routine and emergency repairs in a timely fashion. So you want to be certified and you want mom or dad up there to be able to feel confident sending their kid to your place. These are the things, if you're running a sober house, that you're going to have to do in order to get his, I shouldn't say his, FAR certification. So that's kind of a little more detail of what we're looking at. But right now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. This is James K. Green. I'm sorry. I know him as Jim. I've known him for years. He's a lawyer based in West Palm Beach, focusing on complex federal and civil litigation, land use, constitutional law, civil and human rights, and class actions. Green has been practicing law for almost 40 years and is admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court and all state and federal courts in Florida and the District of Columbia. He has argued numerous major civil rights cases throughout his career, and one of them being the Jeffrey O. versus City of Boca Raton, which was a sober home case. And with that, I give you Jim Green. Jim.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Angie and Takesha, Legal Aid Society. Thank everyone here for showing interest in this most difficult area of public policy, housing, and civil rights law. At the outset, I think we're all in agreement that there is a great need for more quality treatment and housing for people in recovery. I think that the biggest barrier to treatment and housing is money and NIMBY. NIMBY is a term called not in my backyard. I think we're all in agreement that poor people, including poor people in recovery, often get substandard, overcrowded housing. That noted, I would like to talk about the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And at the end, I'd like to offer some brief comments about the Senate and House sober home bills. 50 years ago, there were no federal fair housing law protections. In 1968, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which provided protection against discrimination based on race and ethnicity. A few years later, it was extended to prohibit discrimination based on gender. In 1988, President Reagan signed into law the Fair Housing Act of 1988, which extended the Fair Housing Act's protections to people with handicaps. Later, the preferred term became people with disabilities, and the definition of handicap was specifically included people who were in treatment or people who were in recovery from substance abuse. Why did President Reagan sign or extend that protection? Most people don't think of President Reagan as a protector of civil rights or a visionary in terms of civil rights. The reason is in the late 70s, those of us who were here in Florida remember that there was a lot of marijuana smuggling onto our shores, primarily from Jamaica, and a lot of cocaine smuggling from Colombia. When President Reagan became president, he became either the second or third president to declare war on drugs or declare war again on drugs. Federal criminal penalties were ramped up, and within a few years there were hundreds of thousands of new prisoners in federal prisons. Around 1984, 1985, some of the policymakers in the Reagan administration said, well, that's a good beginning to an anti-drug policy. However, we need to look, we can't lock them up and throw away the key. We need to figure out some way to give people treatment for substance abuse. The Reagan administration, which was pretty much in favor of any solution that didn't involve federal funding or federal government involvement, looked around the country, and right next to the District of Columbia was Silver Spring, Maryland, where a gentleman named Paul Malloy had begun the Oxford House movement. The Oxford House movement began in Silver Spring, and it involves the chartering of privately owned homes or leased homes that are committed to sobriety. One of the problems with substance abuse treatment, and I'm going to oversimplify that for all professional substance abuse treatment providers here, is people would either go into detox and then go back to their old homes and jobs and triggers, or they go through detox, then go into a 28-day program, then go back to their home residence. One of the things that the Oxford House movement recognized was that people needed to be, who were in recovery and needed to be reinforced in their sobriety and needed to live around other people who were committed to sobriety. So the Oxford House movement began with a couple of basic principles. One is commitment to sobriety, zero tolerance for people who don't stay sober, and self-governance. Typically, Oxford houses are comprised of 6 to 14 people, and they form the Oxford House model forms the basis with a lot of variations and experimentations around the country for recovery residences that I think FAR and the legislature have been examining in the last few years. The Reagan administration, going back to the mid-'80s, went to Paul Malloy and said, well, what's the biggest problem with the Oxford House movement becoming nationwide? And he said, local zoning laws. Typically, there are family definitions, and the family definitions say that more than 2 unrelated people can live together, or 3 unrelated, or 4 unregulated. I've seen as many as 6 unregulated, 6 unrelated people being included within a family definition. And he said, we just can't open in single-family neighborhoods. We don't want to open in commercial neighborhoods. We don't want to open in neighborhoods where there are a lot of bars and restaurants and hotels and motels and other gathering places that are residents previously associated with drinking or drugging. We need to live in single-family neighborhoods. And most of these family definitions, including, I think, Christine talked about the Jeffrey O. against City of Boca Raton case, will limit the number of unrelated people, I think, to no more than 3 unrelated people. So you could have any number of related people living together in a home, plus servants. And I think there were some hypotheticals where as many as 20 or 25 people could live in one residence. I had, for instance, had a had a brother who had 4 of his own children and married a woman who had 5 of her children. And so they had 11 children that were living in a single-family neighborhood. No one would think twice about having 11 people related by blood or marriage living in a single-family neighborhood. But if you try to move in 6 or 8 or 9 people in recovery into a single-family neighborhood, the first reaction is not in my backyard. What are you doing to our property values? What are you doing to our neighborhood? Am I going to feel safe letting my children go out into the yard or walk down the street and play? 10 years ago, Steve Poland, who's a lawyer for the Oxford House Movement in Washington, D.C., Beth Pepper, who is been with the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Rights and then was in a private practice in Baltimore and is now with the United States Department of Justice, and I were hired by a couple of treatment and housing providers in Sarasota County to defend a zoning action by Sarasota County. Little did we know when we began the litigation that Sarasota County would spend $3.2 million fighting us, trying to shut down my clients' recovery residences. And little did we know that we would spend thousands and thousands of hours of our time fighting. Fortunately, we had the United States Department of Justice join our case, and on the eve of trial, now United States District Judge Mary Scriven, and this was in federal court in Tampa, brokered a settlement. One of the problems that we had, and one of the problems that the county had, is that I think people are in favor of, and jurors generally are in favor of the idea of fair housing for everybody, especially people of color. But there's a kind of I think there's a national recognition, a general community recognition that there should not be racial discrimination in housing. The next hardest thing is to establish that there shouldn't be discrimination based upon psychiatric disabilities. And I think the hardest, and I base this on my experience nearly 40 years trying jury cases, is establishing that people in recovery are qualified people with disabilities who deserve the protection of federal law not to be discriminated against based upon their disability. One of the things that we did in preparing for that case was to do a mock jury trial. We bring in a group of people from the community and we try to get their input on how they feel about people in recovery. One of the things I did in preparing for that mock jury was I went around, and I've got most of my friends, believe it or not, are not lawyers, and I go around and I ask my friends from all walks of life, how would you feel if you learned that a house of 8 recovering addicts was moving next door to you? And you'd be surprised with the answer. A lot of my progressive friends, you could just see them tense up. A lot of other people said, they're not a family. And the interesting thing to me was the demographics. The 2 groups that were most protective, most willing to follow the law were 1, retired military people who had served on courts martial and had wanted to know what federal law required. They could understand how to follow the law without emotion. The second, and this was a big surprise, were evangelicals. They, and I would ask, well, why do you think people should be allowed to, recovering addicts should be allowed to live in your next door to you? So, everyone deserves fairness. Everyone deserves some kind of salvation. And with that in mind, I'd like to show you, what I'd like to do is talk a little more about fair housing laws in a minute, but I'd like to show you something that happened at a hearing that I had last year. And this was just an example of the kind of testimony I hear at a public zoning hearing here in South Florida.
How's everyone doing today? Name and address, please. My name is, I was just about to get that. My name is Pedro Jr. Gonzalez. I live in 6020 Northeast 6th Avenue. And technically, I just found out about this 3 hours ago. I am a business owner. I do run the Florida Computer Butler. I run it out of my home. I am a business owner. I do see this being a big mistake basically in your part and in their part. I understand that they're I was just about to get that. Sorry, I'm new at this. My name is Pedro Jr. Gonzalez. I live in 6020 Northeast 6th Avenue. And technically, I just found out about this 3 hours ago. I am a business owner. I do run the Florida Computer Butler. I run it out of my home. I am a business owner. I do see this being a big mistake basically in your part and in their part. I understand that they're trying to help people, that's fine and dandy, but they can do that in another location. There are children there. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you facts and all the stuff and what it comes down to. My mother's a crossing guard. She crosses people there and at North Andrews Gardens. She passes little kids every day. I don't need crackheads, I don't need whores, I don't need football players, I don't need bastards who are probably gonna rape little kids being right there, right in our neighborhood. That really irritates the hell out of me. I work way too hard. I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to find out, hey, guess what? We're putting a rehab center. I used to date someone who was in rehab. Let me tell you my experience. My experience was hell. I took her to Broward Rehab Center. She left 3 times. What did she do? She went around the corner, bought drugs, came back, robbed, steal. She robbed from me, she stole from me. I let her go. Now, you're gonna bring that into our neighborhood? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Especially when there are kids around the corner. I don't need red diaper doper babies. I really don't. I don't need them here. I don't need them to be treated here. If they want to go be treated, they can be treated in some other locations. They have other locations. Doctors, they can do all the good help and everything, but it comes down to, at the end of the day, it's basically the person. We don't know what they're going to react to. Like they say, it's the unknown. Laws change. Who cares? At the end of the day, it comes down to the person. That person, you don't know what the unknown is, what they're going to do. All I know is, if they kill my mother, I'm gonna kill them, and I'm gonna hold them responsible. And I'm gonna kill them. And I'm telling you right now under oath, you fuck with me, I'll fuck with you. My neighbors know this. I take this very seriously. And I know there's an officer here, if he wants to arrest me, he can arrest me right now. Because I really don't care anymore. I'm done. I'm sick and tired of this. If you're gonna do this, remember, you're dealing with people's lives. I'm a business owner. My company is growing. I'm gonna bring business into this community. And what are you gonna do? You're gonna throw me behind bars because I killed a crackhead who was trying to rape or steal or try to go in one of my neighbor's house. We don't need this, we really don't. And if I offended anybody, I do apologize. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse or anything. This is my first time, I've never done this before. So, I don't know what to tell you. I've been here since the 90s. We moved into Oakland Park because my mother and my father, God rest his soul, who just died 2 years ago, they got ambushed in Lauder Hill, and they got robbed. My mother ran to the hills. My father got his ass whooped. Seriously. And we moved into this neighborhood because we believed in this neighborhood. It was a good neighborhood. We're 30 minutes away from Boca. We're 30 minutes away from Fort Lauderdale, depending on how bad traffic is. We're a central location. This is a good location to have businesses and to have good, hardworking people. Money doesn't solve everything. I know you guys need more money. You raise taxes, you lower taxes, you do whatever you have to do at the end of the day. But you're playing with kids' lives. I don't think that a couple of $1 million is gonna be beneficial if a kid gets raped. Or I end up shooting somebody, now that's $1 million that, or a couple of $1 million. So now I need a defense attorney. It's gonna cost taxpayers money, so on and so forth. Is it worth it? I don't think so. I know my mother doesn't think so. I know a bunch of the people here who are residents don't think so. So why? Why put us in a scenario like this? It doesn't pay. It really doesn't. You can tear down that place, or you can give it to the Light of the World. Light of the World is a nonprofit. They have that little tiny corner there on Prosper, and their volunteer clinic. They need space. Why don't you give it to them? They need it.
Sir, before you continue, you can keep going as long as you want. You cannot curse.
I know, I'm not cursing. I said Light of the World. I already said I apologize.
You did.
What's his phone number?
I apologize for some of the language that was used there. I think we could all agree that this gentleman was passionate. I also believe that he was very effective in emoting the fear of the unknown. I think he also illustrates another point that I think we all agree about, and that's that we need more public education about substance abuse treatment, and the need for more substance abuse treatment in housing. But I also think that he was just one of 100 people who showed up in a room a quarter size of this room. The crowds were spilling out to the back. There was a glass in the back, and people were holding up signs so that the city commissioners could see the overwhelming community hostility. This was a political firestorm in this municipality. It began with one neighbor seeing a notice of this proposed conditional use application posted outside this building that had been vacant for 6 years and generating zero tax dollars. And that neighbor went to another neighbor, and pretty soon there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people writing and emailing and talking to city officials saying we don't want this treatment facility in our backyard. The treatment facility had been previously approved as a hospital. The hospital had 300 beds. The proposed substance abuse treatment facility would have 200 beds. It would be a lower density, less vehicular traffic. However, the only difference between the previously approved hospital use and the substance abuse treatment facility use was the fact that the substance abuse treatment facility was going to be treating people with a specific disability. And that specific disability, as most of you know, is one of the most politically unpopular disabilities that is currently protected by the ADA, Fair Housing Act. Let me get back for a minute to the Fair Housing Act. The Reagan officials who were speaking with Paul Malloy about the Oxford House model were attracted for a number of reasons. One is the idea of providing transitional housing made good sense. Number two, there had been some at least anecdotal evidence that this approach reinforced sobriety and extended sobriety. And the third reason was that the Reagan administration said, hey, this is totally privately operated. It doesn't require any federal funds. So based on those three reasons and the testimony of people like Paul Malloy and the late Riley Regan, who was our expert witness in the Jeffrey O. versus City of Boca Raton case, the Reagan administration signed into law the Fair Housing Act of 1988, which extended protections to people in recovery. Both 3 years later, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. It used the term disability as opposed to handicap. I'm going to use the term disability for the next few minutes. Both the ADA and the Fair Housing Act attack discrimination in three ways. First, they prohibit governments, local governments especially, from treating people differently simply because they have a disability. For instance, a law that treats recovering substance abusers or their providers differently from other groups of people or types of disabilities is intentionally discriminatory because it discriminates on its face. Another kind of intentional discrimination is where local government takes actions because of prejudice or hostility to people with disabilities, such as in the Karen Foundation case against the city of Delray Beach. Second, both the ADA and the Fair Housing Act require governments to make changes in how they operate, i.e. reasonable accommodations, so that people with disabilities can get the same access and the same benefits to housing and zoning as other people. Third, these laws also prohibit governmental discrimination in policies or practices. This is what's called disparate impact on people with disabilities. In other words, the law has a disproportionate impact on people with disabilities. That also violates the ADA or Fair Housing Act. For instance, in the Jeffrey O. against City of Boca Raton case, U.S. District Judge Don Middlebrooks held that Boca Raton's family definition of no more than 3 unrelated persons had a disparate impact on people in recovery who needed to live in a recovery residence with more than 3 unrelated persons. Riley Regan's expert testimony in that case was that you need a critical mass of people who are committed to sobriety, and that a recovering person's biggest enemy is, number one, being around other people who are using, number 2, being alone. So that's why 2 or 3 or even 4 unrelated people is not enough to protect you against, minimize the chances of being left alone. Local governments have 2 primary defenses to the ADA and the FHA. One is that the proposed reasonable accommodation would fundamentally alter the zoning scheme. Judge Middlebrooks rejected that argument in Jeffrey O., saying that it wouldn't fundamentally alter it because here you allow an unlimited number of related people who are related by blood marriage or adoption, and any number of servants to live together in one single family home. But you restrict the number of unrelated people to 3. For instance, however, if you try to put a loud nightclub in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, that would likely result in a fundamental alteration of the zoning scheme. Another defense is called undue burden, but that's typically not asserted in a case like that. One of the things that I often hear is we need to about substance abuse treatment providers or substance abuse housing providers is that they are just greedy landlords. I think the language about profiteering can be applied equally to a lot of developers and landlords to people who do not have disabilities. And I don't, so I think language about profiteering is unfortunate and frankly is a weapon in my arsenal if I've got to litigate. I'd like to kind of close out now on the, I know a lot of people are thinking about the sober homes bills that have just passed the Florida House and the Florida Senate. I don't think that there has been a shift in legislative intent. I do think that there's been a shift in language that masks discriminatory intent by the legislature. I think the discrimination is unfair and ugly, and I think it takes a lot of forms. I hear a lot of anecdotal comments about, there's this bad example or there was that bad example. And I'm sure there are some bad examples out there. I know in litigating the Karen Foundation against the City of Delray Beach case, there were politicians who were going around saying our neighborhoods have been inundated with sober homes and the residents of the sober homes are committing large amounts of crime and are trashing the neighborhoods and causing this harm and that harm. I went through thousands and thousands of pages of public records and found zero documentation, zero data. So I think getting back to what the gentleman whose clip we just played about is there are a lot of fears. And I say something that taps into someone else's fear, they get fearful, and pretty soon there's a whispering campaign that erupts into volcanic proportions at public hearings. I think a lot of people from all political, both sides of the political spectrum get very nervous when they think about a group of recovering addicts moving into their single-family neighborhood. And that's understandable. However, that's not what the law allows us or local governments to consider in restricting or regulating sober homes. I said before in terms of the sober home bills that, well, I don't think there's been a shift in intent, but there has been a shift in language. But even in Senator Jeff Clemens' press release from 4 days ago, Florida lawmakers passed legislation to regulate sober homes. He makes these broad statements that I think prevents the continued discriminatory intent. Many communities have been virtually overrun by the number of sober homes that have emerged in the middle of neighborhoods. I don't think there are many communities. I think that the term virtually overrun is emotionally and politically charged. And I just don't think that there's any data to support such a broad statement. You look at some of Representative Hager's, he was a ghostwriter. You look at some of his comments that we cited in the Karen Foundation versus City of Delray Beach injunction motion. There was clear evidence of discriminatory intent by Representative Hager. All that said, I do believe that self-regulation is important, that it should be the goal of each and every person in this room to look for ways to improve the quality of substance abuse treatment programs and substance abuse housing. I have seen, I did a lot of landlord-tenant work when I first went into private practice, and I've seen horrific conditions for poor people across the board. And I think that those conditions are inexcusable. I think that there are existing laws, including Chapter 83 Florida statutes, the landlord-tenant law, the Florida Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices, which is under Chapter 501 Florida statutes, and the rules and regulations promulgated there too. There are nuisance laws that can be enforced. I think that there are occupancy restrictions that can be enforced. Generally speaking, most cities do not have occupancy restrictions, such as the number of square feet per occupant it must be for a single family to live in. I generally advise my clients that 100 square feet for a single resident per bedroom, or 150 feet is kind of a good benchmark. However, I haven't seen any, and I'm sure there are some cities that have enacted some square footage limitations. In conclusion, I know that I probably disagree with Councilwoman Pardo on a lot of things, but I think we would find common ground on the need for open communication. Community outreach, I think there's been very little community outreach by the substance abuse treatment provider and substance abuse housing community. I'd say join your local, one of the things I saw in the FAR film was getting active with the local politicians like in Margate, getting involved in the Chamber of Commerce, like up in Orange Beach. I think these are absolutely critical things. Don't become a part of the community, part of the social fabric. Don't allow yourself, because of the hostile attitudes, to be shunted into a corner and isolated from the community at large. Volunteer for community activities. Make yourself known as volunteers in community activities. And meet with your local government officials. Do not apologize for what you're doing. I hear a lot of clients apologize, feel like basically give validation to the hostility and the discrimination that they or their clients experience. Don't apologize for what you're doing. Be proud of what you're doing. Use your accomplishments, use what you're doing to educate and inform, and hopefully provide better, higher quality housing and substance abuse treatment facilities. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Patricia Rosen. Patricia is the publisher and editor of the Sober World magazine. The Sober World magazine educates families and people who are suffering from addiction. It is the only magazine of its kind that provides education and resources about addiction and recovery. The magazine reaches thousands of people per month through the printed publication, website, and social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Patricia launched the Sober World magazine in 2011 after her son Stephen died from a prescription drug overdose. This tragedy led her to launch the magazine as a means of giving back to families who are suffering the perils of addiction. She wanted to provide a comprehensive resource that provides education about addiction and resources that are available to aid in recovery. As the former vice president and treasurer of Virgin Graphics, Inc., a printing company in Deerfield Beach, she gained experience in the printing industry that has helped her as publisher of Sober World magazine. She attended the University of Miami and studied liberal arts. Patricia grew up in northern New Jersey and has moved to Florida 25 years ago. Patricia is the proud mother of 3 beautiful children and currently resides in Boca Raton, Florida. Patricia?
Angela, for inviting me here today and everybody else that made today possible. If anyone told me 31 years ago, when my son was born, that I would be sitting here as a parent who has lost a child to drugs, I would have looked at them like they were crazy. But I have learned through my son's tragic death and the many people that I meet on a daily basis, no one is immune to addiction. It's happening to families across the country regardless of their economic position, their race, or religion. Addiction knows no bounds. 5 out of 6 families are affected by addiction. If it's not in your immediate family, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, someone you know is affected by it. Before I give you my opinion or talk about sober recovery residences, I think it would make really good sense for those of you that are not involved in the recovery business to understand addiction and what's happening right now in this country. What's happening here in Palm Beach County with the sober homes is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is a really small problem in the scheme of things. Addicts and addiction have been around since the beginning of time, but no one spoke about it. There is something called stigma. And does anyone here know what stigma is? Can they give the definition? Anybody want to? I'll tell you. Stigma, a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. Unfortunately, addiction, along with mental health, carries a stigma. People, up to now at least, didn't speak about it. Families were ashamed and sent their family members away, so people didn't know what was going on in their homes. Alcoholics were sent to mental institutions because they didn't know what to do with that. No one spoke about addiction or mental health. But now, with the epidemic in our country and all the families that are affected by this, there are people, such as myself, that are finding our voices and saying, enough is enough. There is nothing to be ashamed about. Addiction is a scientific, proven brain disease, and it must be treated as such. Just as you would go to a doctor for cancer or diabetes, someone struggling with drugs or alcohol must get help. Families need to know that it's okay to reach out for help and that they are in no way responsible for their loved one's addiction. The more people that speak out and the more people that come forward and say, I am in recovery and I am where you were today, the more lives that will be saved. There are millions of people that are addicts, but they are in recovery today. This is what is happening now. The stigma is starting to dissipate. People are speaking out, and they are also seeking help, which is one reason why we are seeing so many recovery homes opening, and the other reason I'll address in a moment. I also feel it's very important for you to know who my son was, because everyone thinks, not my child, not in our family. My son was an extremely intelligent young man who graduated college with honors. He grew up in a very comfortable home, went to camp, a mother and father who loved him, 2 brothers, and every opportunity to become a successful person. He even interned one summer at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York for Dr. Eric Hollander, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he's world-renowned for his work with OCD and autism. He was offered a job at the end of the summer by Dr. Hollander, but he turned it down because he wanted to finish college. That's how bright he was. So you're probably wondering, how did a smart, good-looking, and kind young man become involved with drugs? How did he lose his life? Well, after finishing college, his intentions were to go for his master's and work. He was surprised, though, after 2 weeks of being out of college, that the offers weren't pouring in. So he was feeling a little depressed and was offered a pharmaceutical drug, which he took, and that was the beginning of the end. The funny thing is, within that week, he was offered a job, which ironically had him writing treatment plans for those struggling with addiction. This very bright young man with a very promising future began to lose his way. For those of you that aren't familiar with drugs, the drug he was offered was OxyContin. OxyContin is an opiate which is highly addictive and is the same thing as heroin, only in a pill form. OxyContin is a highly addictive and is the same thing as heroin. 100 years ago, the Bayer Company, and we know Bayer aspirin, Bayer Company introduced heroin, and it was banned after people became addicted. We now have Pharma, the pharmaceutical giant who has made billions of dollars, who has reintroduced heroin in pill form known as OxyContin, and doctors are wined and dined to prescribe it. If you go into a hospital even, all they will ask you, what is your pain level? What is your pain? How much pain are you in? We now have doctors and hospitals prescribing opiate-based medications for everyday problems, thus the epidemic of overdose deaths and those struggling with addiction. The Hollywood version of an addict is someone under a bridge with a needle in his arm and drool coming out of his mouth. But that's just what it is, a Hollywood version. I have heard addicts or people in recovery referred to as those people. Well, those people today are your doctor, your lawyer, your dry cleaner person, your middle school, high school, college child, your graduate, and your parents. Yes, as sad as that sounds, people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are becoming addicted because they are being prescribed opiates, and it's causing more falls and accidents than ever before. So I ask you, if a sober home opened in your backyard, but it was for people in their 70s, would you feel the same way as young people that you see in recovery? Or if a sober home opens in your backyard and it was just for the medical profession, our doctors that are addicted, would you feel the same way? Because this is exactly what's happening now. There are special tracks for people 55 and over. There's special tracks for doctors, nurses, first responders, even extremely wealthy tycoons. Again, addiction knows no bounds. It's affecting everyone. And as I said, addiction is a disease, and as with any disease, you need to get help. Unfortunately, addiction cannot be cured with an operation or a pill. It requires abstinence, guidance, sometimes medication for an underlying mental health issue, and being in a sober environment. For anyone here who opposes the sober recovery residences in your backyard, I think understanding the process of recovery would be helpful, because by the time a person gets to a recovery residence, they are no longer on drugs. The first step to recovery begins with detox. This is a facility that helps to wean the person off the drug so they are no longer physically dependent. And this can be anywhere from 3 days to over a week, maybe even longer, depending on what they were addicted to and how long it takes to get them weaned off of it. The second step is a 30, 60, or 90-day program, and sometimes people even go for a year somewhere. This is where the patient works with a therapist, a psychiatrist, and other professionals. They figure out the best plan and work at it on a daily basis. By the time they leave, they are clear-headed and ready to practice what they have learned. The third step is a sober recovery residence. And this is where the individual can start to immerse himself or herself back into their former lives gradually with the structure and help of others that are sober. It may be going back to school, a job, outpatient treatment, or whatever they were doing prior to their addiction. This is where the many people, your doctor, your lawyer, your dry cleaner, this is where they all went to practice the tools they learned in recovery. This is the next step, and this is the most important step. They need the support of others who are sober, and they also need structure, which they would not get if they went back home, because most times their parents or loved ones aren't in recovery, don't have a problem with drugs, and they're not equipped to give them what they need. When I found out that sober homes weren't licensed or regulated, I was appalled. I firmly believe that we need to regulate them and have certain standards in place. A legitimate house has rules in place. They have curfews, zero tolerance for drugs, gambling, and indecent language, no pets, no physical confrontations, no people from outside allowed in the home without permission. Thank you, George Jan. I took this from your rules. In a legitimate home, anybody not respecting the rules is asked to leave. As a mother, I want to know my loved one is in a safe environment. Just like you don't want to hear parties all night in your backyard or see people doing drugs in the street, I wouldn't want my child or loved one to go where there are drugs and loitering either. This is the purpose of a sober house. No drugs, no partying, structure. We want, just as you want, a respectable, clean, and sober environment. And to calm everybody down, I have a friend who has her house listed right now for $1.2 million. 2 homes on her block are sober homes. It has not devalued her house. It didn't. It will not. Her house is still worth what it's worth, which is a lot of money. Luckily, FAR and NAR are working towards this goal, and legislation is changing, so those in recovery will have a chance for a healthier life. I suggest, rather than working not to have a sober home in your backyard, work with your local representatives, work with FAR, work with NAR, help figure out how you can keep the people that are not in it for the right reasons closed or not allowed to open in the first place. We can't always choose our neighbors, and whether someone is in recovery, that doesn't make them a bad person or a bad neighbor. They are the same as you and I, trying to live in a clean, decent environment. If Michael Botticelli moved in next door, would you have a problem with that? For those of you who don't know who he is the director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, informally known as the drug czar. He is in recovery. But seriously, there are those that are not in it for the right reason, and they will hinder someone's recovery for $1, and those people do need to be stopped. I urge everyone here that doesn't want a sober recovery residents in their backyard to rethink your position. With the epidemic facing the country, you will not stop the sober homes from going in your backyard, but with the same determination, you could help to regulate how they are operated in order to have a home next door that you would be proud to live next to, and that unsavory people will not have the opportunity to make money off of this terrible disease. Remember, addiction knows no bounds. It can happen to you or somebody close to you. Addiction isn't a choice, it's a disease. If you think differently, I invite you to attend my bereavement group and speak to a couple of mothers whose children took their own lives, not through drugs, but because they couldn't handle being an addict, and no matter how they tried, they couldn't attain recovery. This is the hard and sad truth. We need your help, not your opposition. Help us to make recovery better. Help us to sleep knowing our loved ones are in good hands. You can help make that happen. I also think with the same determination you have for not having a sober home in your backyard, you can get involved in reaching our politicians to find out, more importantly, why the FDA keeps approving medication that is only acceptable for end-of-life care. It has been proven that they do not help rid someone of pain, it only makes it worse. As long as we allow them to keep prescribing opiate medication, heroin, this epidemic is going to continue to get worse, not better. We are creating a generation of addicts. If we can end or limit the prescribing of these pharmaceutical pills, the need for rehab and sober homes would drastically be reduced. Thank you.
we are at the question and answer portion of our meeting today. And there are cards on your tables. If you have any questions, please fill them out. Someone from the staff will be around. Just hold your hand up with your card, and someone from the legal aid staff will pick it up and bring it up here.
Where are the cards?
I believe they're on your table somewhere, right? They're on the table. So while I'm waiting for some questions to come up here, I mentioned this briefly. Yesterday, a 5-page letter was signed by 5 members of Congress and was sent to the AG and the Secretary of Housing. And I just want to read a little bit of the language. Congresswoman Lois Frankel and Congressman Ted Deutsch were among those who signed it. And they have this letter. For example, Delray Beach, Florida, a small city that is a vibrant family and tourist area, has close to 800 sober homes within its city limits. We don't know how many sober homes there are anywhere because there is no database, there is no registration. So I don't know where this number came from, but one of the things that we're hoping that this legislation will do will give us a handle on how many of them there are out there and where they are. So I don't know if we do have 800 in Delray Beach or not, and I don't know even what they're referring to. I do know we have a lot. Current interpretation of federal law is complicating local efforts to effectively regulate sober homes. Consequently, sober home operators are shielded from local regulation of their properties and have been able to use the FHAA and ADA to successfully fight regulations in court. Local city officials have told us that they are hesitant to regulate sober homes because they do not want to face costly litigation. For those reasons, stakeholders are calling for immediate federal action. And let me just read one of the questions here. Does an over-concentration of sober homes in a community constitute a, quote, fundamental alteration of a zoning scheme, thus allowing cities to deny accommodation requests and licenses? And this letter goes on with some of these types of questions, and they're valid questions, but I think when we're speaking about sober homes, recovery residences, we need to think about the terms and the tone in which we discuss them, and I think that's kind of evident in this letter where they're coming from here. Anyway, do we have any questions? Anybody coming up? Okay. Okay, we're not going to be able to get to all your questions, but we've got some here. What is the difference between a sober home and a halfway house? I think I'm going to throw that one over to our friends from FAR and Mr. Green, perhaps. John, do you have a response to that?
Yes. So NAR, the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, recognizes 4 distinct support levels of recovery residences. So first, we don't recognize the term sober house because it's exclusionary. There are individuals in recovery that may never have taken a drink of alcohol in their entire lives. Halfway houses throughout the nation, depending on what area of the nation you're located in, have a very distinct legal definition. Transitional programs for people who are leaving the prison system or the jail system. So that's not our terminology either. A recovery residence is a residence where people are in recovery from addiction. So that's how we define it. And these 4 support levels, we start with the Oxford House model that Jim referenced, which is a democratically run, peer-supported environment that is alcohol, drug-free, and its people in recovery got together and they were living by a set of rules and they self-governed. There's no commerce involved in it whatsoever. Level 2 is a landlord situation where you might have 1, 2, 3, 4 houses and you lease rooms or beds to individuals in recovery. They agree to live by a set of rules and they agree to pay rent on Fridays. And there is an expectation that there's going to be a significant oversight by staff and production individuals. You just can live there, you can go there, that's cool. Level 3 is no clinical services not licensed by the Department of Children and Family Services.
John,
However,
I'm sorry to stop you, but can you come up here so I don't
Yeah,
think everyone can hear you? Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Or I can
Steps to a great job.
Yeah, or you, yeah, either way.
Thank you. So level 3, we have a lot of level 3s in Palm Beach County, and that is 24/7, 365 supervision by credentialed staff. Again, no clinical services, but often people that are enrolled in independent third-party clinical service programs and intensive outpatient programs. They're not associated with that recovery residence, will live in the recovery residence during the evenings and weekends, and then attend clinical services during the day. Then last is level 4, and that is the blending of the social model recovery with the medical model recovery. So there are clinical services that are provided by that operator, but they're not provided in that house. They're provided in a commercially zoned, usually a medical office building, and then transported back into the residential community where they commune together in a peer-supported environment. 4 distinct support levels. One is not better than another. Different and meets the different needs of the populations that they serve.
And real quick, we also had a question, and I'd like maybe Jim could address this one. What is the difference between basically a sober home, a halfway home, and a group home? There are legal differences between group homes and the others.
Well, I think Ms. Rosen talked about stigma, and I think we're dealing with a halfway house. I think John Lehman just said this. It's typically a place where people, offenders, transition back into society. There's a big stigma associated with prisoners and offenders generally. I think group homes tend to be for people with developmental, physical, or psychiatric disabilities. That's kind of the way we look at Florida law. And recovery residences, and again, I agree generally with John Lehman on this, people who want to live in a sober living environment, typically with other people to whom they're not related by blood marriage or adoption.
This screen, I'm sorry. We have one question.
The question is, what does the law say about applying the fire code to these types of occupancies? I think that's a good question. My understanding, and I noticed that I don't see any fire. Okay. If a house with recovery residence is to be treated like a single-family home or a duplex, my understanding is that those are exempt from a number of fire code requirements under the Southern Fire Code. Right. So, on the other hand, if you have a multi-family apartment complex type of recovery residence, the fire code, more stringent fire code requirements under the Florida Fire Code probably do apply, and that would include, I think, sprinkler systems. And I'm sure you can give me a list of 10 other things that would differentiate, 10 other code requirements that would differentiate multifamily apartments from single or duplex type homes. Does that answer your question?
I see some jurisdictions that got in, like the basic fire code doesn't apply. There's a group home or a residential home care, fire alarm and fire protection is required. So I'm really going to law speech and a lot of jurisdictions are putting stuff on this. And we're hearing a lot of the federal law says it's residential home and fire code doesn't apply. So I'm just wondering if there's any debate, any fixed law that says that the fire code doesn't apply and police have a residential cover.
I can speak to one case. It's called somnaminitis, and I may have mispronounced it. It's in the District of Connecticut that was appealed twice to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Eventually, the fire code issue there was resolved by the Connecticut Fire Marshal granting an exemption and treating an Oxford house which had more than 6 persons as a regular single-family home. So the one case that I'm familiar with that squarely addressed that issue was resolved by the state fire marshal granting an exemption pursuant to his authority to do so.
Jim.
Yes.
We've dealt with recently, if I may, because this just came up.
This is Jeffrey Lynn.
I don't mean to take over the. We just dealt with this. My name is Jeffrey Lynn. Justin Claude and I worked with Jim on a number of things. We just spoke with the State Fire Marshal's office. It's an excellent question because the Florida Fire Protection Code has this demarcation line of 6 people. And we spoke with, I can't remember her name, but she's the State Fire Marshal, in conjunction with DCF over why is there this disparate treatment between houses for people in recovery versus if I have 10 kids, I don't have to put sprinklers in or whatever. And the response was actually very good, which is that the code is being applied for people that, it's a bad presumption, and the State Fire Marshal recognizes that and needs to do rulemaking with DCF. That people in recovery, room and board and care are not ambulatory, are not capable of self-preservation. So if there's a fire that goes off, like if you're in a hotel or whatever, and that's a wrong concept, and they recognize that. However, on the flip side, the difference between families that are either related by blood or marriage versus not is that there is a presumption, and it's a societal presumption. It's neither right nor wrong. It's a presumption that if I'm living with my family, either blood or marriage, and there's an emergency situation, there's a presumption. I'm more likely to make sure they all get out of the house, as opposed to even a fraternity house, which is required to have sprinklers, which is, hey, I'm getting the heck out of here, it's on you. You know? So while there's no data to really study those outcomes, at some point the State Fire Marshal made that presumptive decision. But where then do sober living residences, where people who chose the family for themselves, what do you do with a recovery residence where people do care about each other? That is now subject to discussion at the state level, and we've been told by the State Fire Marshal and by DCF's General Counsel that if they understand that there's this disparate treatment and that they need to discuss that, as you know, I remember the statute, and I'll end on this, that sprinklers are a very expensive proposition, but the state statute says that we don't want to make it so expensive so that people can't live in a home, so there can be viable alternatives. The sprinkler companies are not in the business of producing those viable alternatives. They want to give you sprinklers, so that the State Fire Marshal has decided, at least has verbalized to us, that they're going to start trying to discuss through rulemaking what a viable alternative would be for a recovery residence. Granted, the discussion then came down to how do you distinguish a recovery residence from a certified recovery residence. I said, I have just the answer for you. Call FAR, they'll help you with that. And that's it. But thank you. It's a very timely question. Thank you.
I have another question for Jim here. This is a good question. Will the new legislation help determine where sober homes are permitted?
No.
Thank you very much. That was easy. This is another question. This is for John Lehman. In recent press articles, it mentions that you have helped in an investigation of some unscrupulous sober home operators. You should be commended for your effort. Have you found that the FAR application process is a useful tool in gathering information to help investigators in their goal of stopping unethical behavior in the industry?
Thank you for your support, and the answer to your question is no. We have a confidentiality policy. All information that's provided to us by an applicant for certification is confidential. That being said, if a subpoena was presented, we would certainly honor that subpoena, but no subpoena has been submitted, and so we've never been tested on that. The information that we have provided to the investigation unit is come from grievance. One of the ways that we implement the standards, because the question would be, everybody can get their act together and make it look good for an inspector when they come out there with the initial visit. How do we hold them accountable to maintain compliance with certification? The answer is that we have a grievance policy that allows any stakeholder in the community, former resident, former staff member, etc., to file a grievance, and if we find that grievance to be credibly addressing issues related to standards, then we will investigate it. And if we find that a law, in our estimation, is being broken, then we will refer the grievant, who, if they are willing to testify directly to law enforcement, we will refer that person to the law enforcement agency that is most appropriate for that grievance. And so we make these connections, we connect the dots. Recently we've gotten opened a channel to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Office. They've indicated that this is a matter of great interest to them, and that they would like to make certain that we connect the dots there as well. So we don't funnel actual information ourselves to the investigation that's currently going on. What we do is we connect people that have firsthand knowledge with that state law enforcement agency that then brings the FBI and the IRS when necessary into further investigation.
Okay. We have one last question here. This one is very close to my heart. How can the recovery industry address the overwhelming need for treatment of co-occurring substance abuse? Hey, Jim. Co-occurring substance abuse and mental health issues. A stable living situation is critical to improvement of both conditions. These are conditions, people such as myself, who suffer from not only a substance abuse issue, but also co-occurring mental health issues such as depression, bipolar, schizoaffective, and anyway, you have homes that are going to be addressing, or that do address those types of issues. Jim, how can those issues?
Get a 394 license. Excuse me, get a license from ACA that authorizes you to provide treatment for a co-occurring disorder such as depression or any other kind of co-occurring psychiatric disorder. That raises another question, which I'm dealing with a local municipality, which has wisely created a zoning district where substance abuse treatment providers can provide residential treatment. And however, one of my clients wants to also get an ACA license to provide psychiatric treatment for co-occurring disorder, and somehow the fact that you might have two licenses, one under Chapter 397 for substance abuse treatment and two under ACA to provide psychiatric treatment just doesn't compute with the local government. That's something I'm trying to work through with, in fact, today.
Great. Okay. That's that, and I appreciate everyone for coming today. And I'm going to turn this back over